Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading into the middle of nowhere for a truly chilling collection of stories. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I am a hiker. I love the mountains. And during the coldest period of the year, I climbed Mount Daisetsu-san in Hokkaido. It was freezing, one of the coldest winters I have ever experienced. Despite the winter temperature that day, the weather was gorgeous even from the early morning. It was the perfect day for climbing. But it was winter, and the weather can change in the blink of an eye up in the mountains. During the afternoon, the clouds in the sky looked dark, and in no time at all, an intense snowstorm had started up. It was a bit too late now to turn back, and it would have been incredibly dangerous to do so. I knew that if I kept on climbing, I would get to a cabin which was built as an emergency shelter, but I was concerned that I wouldn't be able to find it due to the whiteout. I didn't even know my position on the mountain. I was prepared to camp out in a bivouac if necessary, like a tent. I have lots of experience in climbing, hiking and camping and came prepared that day. And despite being prepared, I wasn't really looking forward to the prospect of camping in the snowstorm. Just as soon as those thoughts came to mind, the weather turned again. The snowstorm was showing signs of slowing. I could see my way again, and after a short hike managed to figure out where I was. I didn't risk it, and headed straight for the emergency shelter. It took me about 2 hours. I was feeling anxious and worried. But despite my anxiety, I found the cabin, which was almost entirely covered by snow. The sun was beginning to set. You know how early the sun can set in winter, and I didn't want to be out there in the dark. I was so relieved to find the cabin, and when I went in I noticed that there were 2 others in there. They were lying down sleeping. I didn't want to wake them, so I quietly closed the door. I laid out my sleeping bag and got in. I wanted to be warm, and after warming up a little I made a quick dinner with my provisions and then laid down to sleep. I woke up during the night. I don't know how long I'd slept for, hours, minutes, but was awoken by some mumbling sound. I guess it was the voices of those hikers who were in the cabin with me. I listened carefully, and it sounded like it was a man and woman speaking, like they were talking about their trip they were planning for tomorrow and the weather. I could hear some muffled laughter at points, and was thinking, why not just save the chat for the morning? Include me too if we're going the same way and help each other out. And while I was thinking these thoughts, I fell back into a deep sleep. I woke up the following morning. The atmosphere felt heavy. After a moment or two of being awoken, about 10 men came rushing into the cabin. It scared the hell out of me. It was as cold as ice in there. One of the men said, "Oh God, you're still alive." I don't know what the hell he was talking about. I had just woken up, I was so confused. Then another one of the men said, "No, it's them over there." He gestured with his chin in the direction of the man and woman I was sharing the cabin with. I asked them what was going on, and I was told that the 2 with me had radioed for rescue, but unfortunately due to the terrible snowstorm, the rescue helicopter couldn't get up to them. The only choice the rescuers had was to go by foot, and it took 2 days to reach them on the mountain. Sadly, it was too late for the couple. They passed away due to exposure at a higher point in their climb. The rescued men were unable to bring the bodies down the mountain because the weather took another turn, so a decision was made to leave the bodies in the emergency shelter cabin rather than risk a double tragedy. I couldn't get my head around it. I couldn't grasp the situation. What about the mumbling voices I heard? What about their conversation about how they were going to get down the mountain? Hallucinations and auditory hallucinations are not uncommon in the harshest of winters apparently. But is that really what it was? I wasn't convinced. I asked if they were a couple, because the way they were speaking to one another sounded like they were. They confirmed that they were newlywed, and the climb was part of their honeymoon. Furthermore, the male was apparently known to this mountain rescue team, as he was a prolific climber. I was advised to leave the mountain range before the weather took another turn. I took that advice and made it safely down the mountain. It gave me a long time to think about the experience I had. I still think about it often. When I heard that I had spent the night with 2 fresh bodies, I was at first creeped out, especially since I swear I heard them talking to each other. I thought about the voices I heard. They were cheerful, not frightening. They even laughed with one another at some points. That kind of warms my heart. The mountains are wonderful places, and when I heard them say that they were planning on leaving the mountains in the morning, I hope they did and are at rest. If I pass on in the mountains, I'd like to think I'd be alright with that. Thinking about my experience in this way makes me feel better about the whole thing. During a university trip to a ski resort, me and some friends went to watch the stars. We were all part of an astronomy club and wanted to note down some key information we wouldn't have seen with the bright city lights. It was our first year at the university, and we went to the forest, but still close to the skiing place. We took some pictures, noted things down until our legs got cold, and then we decided to go up. 2 of my friends, Steve and Bob, fell down, grabbing us thanks to instinct, which led all of us to fall down. Note, we crossed the barrier, so that's why we kept falling. We were rolling, but since our hands and arms were cold, and we ourselves were tired, we couldn't move despite our best attempts. After a while, we dropped to this unused ski trail that was a double black diamond. We later learned that the trail was abandoned, but didn't know it at the time. As we stood up, we felt like we were being watched. Time also seemed to go really fast somehow, but that's probably due to the fact that we were all exhausted, and the place was very calm. We walked around the trail but heard the scream of a man and thought someone had tripped like us, so we ran to help, yelling for them. But no response came from the man, other than screaming, moaning, groaning and crying. We yelled again, but the man never responded. As we closed in the distance, some of us tried to go back because the man might do something bad to us. But as we walked just a few steps closer, we saw the shadow of a 30-ish-year-old man weeping. We were probably 20 meters away, but then the man was the most scary thing I've seen in my entire life. Doing nothing but crying on the snow, with nothing but a jacket and a pair of sweatpants. As soon as we saw him, we ran as fast as we could, holding back the pain, and spent a good half hour reclimbing that cliff. When we finished, we quickly ran back to our rooms and reported the incident to the police, but I never heard back. This was legit one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me and my group of friends. The trail somehow made time go so fast, with its calmness and beautiful glow under the moonlight and the light of the stars. My memory is kind of crappy, but I remember that what felt like 5 minutes of wandering was almost triple that time. A family was camping, and their golden retriever brought a human femur with an artificial hip joint attached out of the woods. I was a rural cop who handled the case. We ran the serial number on the hip, and it came back to a woman who had been reported missing in the area about 15 years prior. Multiple theories had been put forward, but her body and vehicle had never been recovered. We organized a search party to recover remains, and were able to locate both her remains and the vehicle, and solve the case. There was a section of highway about 2 miles north of the campsite where the dog had found the femur. It made a sharp turn and had about a 50-foot drop into a heavily forested basin. Her vehicle left the road and crashed at the bottom of the cliffs, killing her. Scavenger animals then spread the remains over a wide area in the basin. It's in a remote area and no one would have witnessed the crash, and the car was not visible from the tops of the cliffs, so she and her car had been missing for 15 years, and it was only sitting 50 feet off the road the entire time. One Saturday when I was around 13, my uncle came round with his girlfriend and my 2 younger cousins. Our other 2 cousins were staying at the flat for the weekend, and a further younger female cousin had asked Mum if she could also stay. This was a regular occurrence for us kids. The weekends and school holidays were a free-for-all, a constant stream of kids staying at one place or another, making makeshift beds with beanbags and floor cushions, or just crashing out on the floor with sleeping bags. My mum and aunties all used to joke that in the holidays, their homes turned into regular old doss houses. Apart from my 5 cousins and I, my friend Jay was there, and he too was at our flat every weekend. And his parents knew he would be okay. Mum had the reputation for being cool, but very strict. We all hung out together, had a sandwich and a drink, and played on the Sega. Then Mum and my uncle's partner said we should all go for a walk. Everyone thought it was a great idea, so the 10 of us set out. The 3 adults decided that we should go to Donkey Woods, which is a bit of a green wildland owned by the council, much like Hearthland. As kids, we used to go over a lot in the spring, summer, and autumn on our own, or with family. It was reasonably safe and kid-friendly, and still felt wild enough to make you feel adventurous and not in West London. We all walked the half-mile down the road to Donkey Woods, where we walked along the river until we reached further into the woods, and while Mum, my uncle and his partner all sat down to have a cigarette, us 7 kids went exploring. As I've mentioned before, we all knew Donkey Woods really well, and were totally at ease and comfortable over there, so we weren't expecting anything unusual or creepy. It was just another mid-August late Saturday afternoon, and we were just messing around. My cousin Tim and my friend Jay and I were talking, when suddenly the other 4 kids came running up. They hadn't been too far away to begin with anyway. They were just out of breath and looked a little rattled. The 4 of them told us that they had seen something odd in one of the small clearings. They couldn't tell us and insisted we had to come and see. We all thought it was just a manger wind-up, but when we got to the clearing our mood changed. Not to fear, but more like a sense of unsettling apprehension. In the middle of the clearing were 3 small tents in a rough triangle, and in the middle of the tents was a small, still smouldering fire, and around the edges of the clearing were several small dead sparrows. The whole scene was very unnatural and eerie, and I felt a distinctive drop in the temperature, most likely my imagination, but still quite evident. Now, the rough sleepers of the area did use Donkey Woods as a base, but not in that particular place of the woods, as it was too close to the main road and the homeless people avoided harassment and abuse from certain unpleasant individuals by going further into the woods to prevent any kind of confrontation. The homeless people who lived over Donkey Woods also didn't use tents. They would make shelters from pieces of wood and plastic sheeting, and Donkey Woods isn't a place where people go camping recreationally, so we felt there was something very strange about the scene in this clearing. I told the 4 younger ones to go get the adults while we were gone. Me, Jay, and Tim didn't move. Tim, who was, and still is, as tough as nails, was completely colourless. You couldn't see their freckles at all. I didn't even move my wheelchair around the area as I normally would have done. Just Jay kept saying, "What the actual hell?" When the adults came back with the other kids, they were all clearly unnerved by the odd scene as much as we were, and it was soon agreed by everyone that we should leave the clearing and Donkey Woods immediately. The most creepy part about this incident was the next morning my uncle went to see my other uncle, and together they went over to Donkey Woods and look around more. They went to the clearing, but there was nothing there, not even the marks in the ground from the tent poles or anything. No sign of the fire, and no tiny dead birds. It was an incredibly bizarre experience. In the summer of 2012, when my mum was 30, she had a habit of jogging late at night on the track in the forest. Our town is small, considered safe, and is a big tourist destination. The track in the forest is illuminated by streetlight, and it's visible in the front and back, but the sides are full of trees and it's completely black when it's dark. She was jogging one night as usual, but got scared without any reason and felt like she was being watched or followed. She continued jogging for a few more minutes, but heard something behind her, and turned around to see what it was. She saw a pair of jeans in the middle of the track and immediately ran away, got into the car and went home. 2 days later, the body of a 31-year-old Mexican woman was found shallowly buried and covered with branches in that same forest. The murderer sliced her throat so badly it nearly took her head off. It was all over the news. He got caught, but he's going to be released in 2027 because he pleaded not guilty. To this day, I believe my mom wasn't going to be the target, but the witness and collateral damage that she may have been that night had she not run away is a very scary thought. I'm a very seasoned hiker. 2 long trails under my belt and a few thousand trail miles and hundreds of nights spent in the woods, many of them solo. I've had black bears around my tent numerous times, even been booped in the hammock by one. I'll just tell you one experience that I think you'll enjoy. I was passed out in my hammock one night at 2 a.m. in a familiar area I've hiked and camped in for many years. Suddenly I'm wide awake and almost buzzing, like someone with way too much caffeine in their system. Think stacking a monster with a pre-workout. I dropped out of my hammock to have a look around as I was fully enclosed within it, with the rain fly up. I don't see anything odd. I don't hear anything at all, which is weird because the woods are never quiet. Everything feels heavy, very oppressive. My brain is telling me to get out of there, grab my stuff and pack. I also did something I've never done before while hiking. Grab my holster and pistol and clip it to my pack. I always conceal, but not that night. Around then I noticed a barely audible, very high-pitched whine. I couldn't figure which direction it was coming from, it was just there. I haul ass about half a mile down the trail back towards the trailhead, and when I hit the car it just stopped. I felt fine, the panic was gone. I was hearing normal things in the woods and the whole feeling of oppression ceased. I don't know what happened. Was it a sleep disturbance leading to an anxiety attack both times? I've read exposure to electromagnetic fields causes such a reaction. Or was it something supernatural? I have absolutely no clue. Back when I was 13, I was extremely dumb. One day I was out with some friends, and I was on holiday and had only just met these people when we decided to go into the woods. Now these woods are huge, and it's pretty much a death trap since there are lots of ditches. Being the dumb kids we are, we went in them at around 6 or 7, and our curfew was at 9, and we were warned not to go into the woods. My buddy runs ahead to an old cabin that seemed pretty empty, so we went in and took a look around. Now, this is where it gets interesting. We hear a creaking in one of the rooms. By now, one of the girls was in tears, thinking some mass murderer was in there getting ready to kill us. My buddy who had discovered the cabin was 15 at the time, so he went ahead. As he slowly creaked open the door, we could see a rocking chair moving with no one in it. Classic horror movie moment, but we noped out of there ASAP. We never told anyone what happened or where we'd been. We just stayed safe, and I won't go there anymore. I'm 29 years old and live in Switzerland, where I work as a cop. Basically, it's like 911. Someone calls, then dispatch sends us for all kind of things. Some things you see in the job change your perspective of what's normal, and you meet all kinds of people, sometimes weird places too, but in general my country is safe and I almost never carry my gun home unless I train at the shooting range. Also, I love music and driving cars. It helps me clear my mind and makes me feel good. This is relevant to the story. Some time ago, I met a club of car enthusiasts, and from time to time we'd meet and do little road trips across the country. I'm also very chill and calm and try to find a peaceful solution to anything, especially at work. I try to always see the good in people and prefer talking to them. But last year, I went on a road trip with a nice guy I met through the car club, Robert. The trip was really cool. We drove almost all night. felt like playing NFS, which was great because the lights of the city looked beautiful at that time, and I'm more of a night owl. After the trip, we'd say we'd stay in touch to make another trip someday. Weeks passed when suddenly I got a message on WhatsApp. "Hey, it's been a while. How are you? Still up for a little trip? Tell me when you're free." When I saw the message, I directly checked my schedule and found a free day, and sent him a message back. "Hey, yeah, sure, I'm free on this day. Let me know if it works for you." He answers, "Okay, works for me. Where do you want to hike?" Then I was confused. Why was he talking about hiking? I checked again the message and noticed it was written by another Robert, 2 from my contacts. Not only did I mistake the dudes by name, but also because their profile pictures on WhatsApp looked alike a lot. The guy that contacted me was an old acquaintance I met through some of my friends when I did some DJ set parties. It was a few years ago now, and we were both passionate about the same music. Then from time to time we'd bump into each other at concerts, so I just planned a day with this guy I'd mistaken for someone else. I felt bad and didn't want to cancel, because although it wasn't the person I thought, the guy was nice too, and it'd been a while since I went for a hike in the woods or mountains. So I was like, yeah, why the hell not? Then we started planning the hike. I didn't want something too challenging, so I made a proposal. I knew a nice hike that went through the woods and mountains, and the views were beautiful, and you got to meet hikers here and there. The path has multiple campfire spots where you can grill some sausages. The second Robert agreed, and asked if it was okay for me to pick him up at the train station, and will leave my car at the parking lot next to the woods. The day of the hike rolled around. I arrived at the train station where I was meeting the second Robert. I looked through the place and couldn't find him. Then he waved at me. Here, I got my first red flag. The guy I knew and saw on his profile picture looked different. I went up to this Robert, but he looked sloppy. He grew long hair and had a beard. I threw his bag into my trunk and we went off. During the ride, I noticed that this Robert smelled bad. It was the kind of odor I smell on the job when I'm confronted with homeless or drug addicts, but I noticed that he came well equipped for the hike, which meant he wasn't in a no money situation, so I decided not to judge him because of his body odor and to ignore it. Besides, we'll be in the woods, so I'd probably not notice it all that much. We started at a shop near the woods to get some fire starters, and that's when Robert asked me if I was up for changing the hike, because he knew another location close to the one I had chosen that had some nice spots for pictures, and we both carried good cameras. I'm good with a map, and checked it on my special app. The hike was the same length as mine, but it went near a river which I found really nice. Sure, let's do it. Finally, we parked my car and arrived at the forest. I saw some old barns there, and a little field for cows, and our trip began. During the hike, I was questioning Robert on his life to catch up. I already knew he was a smart guy who did engineering school, but I learned he moved out of our city, found some job at a construction company where he did all kinds of calculus to build stuff. Then the more I learned about his life, the more I felt like something was odd. Robert started telling me he had a girlfriend, but they were going through some hard times, and he thought she might leave him soon. Then he continued saying that he missed some days at work because he felt depressed and because he wasn't quite sure it pleased him anymore, and said he might get fired. I was trying to cheer him up and keep him focused on the good stuff, and advised him to consult if necessary. He asked me about my job and how I react with dangerous people and stuff like that. I wasn't reassured by this conversation, but I do get these questions from people often. At some point near the river, we found what looked like old ruins of an old mill, I'd say between 1880 to 1920. It was a very cool spot, and I took some pictures, but we didn't see any people on our path, and the sky got slightly cloudy and it began to rain. I was well equipped and carried everything you need in this kind of place: water, food, fire starters, first aid, and a knife. We kept moving until we found a campfire spot with a wooden table, and we decided to stay there and eat. I asked Robert to go get some wood while I set up the table and look for the little branches to maintain the fire. Robert puts his bag on the table and starts to show me the tools he got with him. He grabs a big handsaw, puts it on the table, and then he takes out 2 knives. One of them was a really big one. Switzerland's laws are a bit too permissive in regarding large knives, in my opinion, and I was quite surprised to see this kind of knife, because it's a 3-hour hike and we're not staying for the night or hunting anything. So I decided to pull out the knife out of the knife holster that I had attached to my belt and go get the branches. Robert looked at me and then said something in a surprised tone that froze me to the bone. "Oh, you brought a knife too?" Immediately my mind began to race. 2? What does that mean? Why wasn't I supposed to get a knife when we planned to go into the woods and make a campfire? Robert suddenly leaves to get what I asked him to bring, and I got an uneasy feeling. It's like my whole body was in alert mode, saying that something was going on. I used to be around dangerous people at the job all the time, but it's different when you're working fully equipped with a bulletproof vest, gun, and pepper spray, and you're with a partner in this situation. I, right now, wasn't. I was alone in the woods in the middle of nowhere and couldn't see a single soul on this path. From that moment on, I decided to keep both eyes on Robert and kept him in sight at all times, especially where his hands were. That's what you learn at the police academy. People always use their hands to do harm. Moreover, I decided to keep a minimum distance in case he tried to do something. A few minutes later, Robert came back, but saw the branches he grabbed from the trees, knife still in hand, and looks straight at me and just stands there. Suddenly, he says, emotionless and empty, "I'm sorry." I got up and looked at him. I was sure he was going to run at me or try something bad, and I got a rush of adrenaline. Then he started to mumble something I could barely understand. "We're both here in the woods, alone. We got knives. I'm sorry." What did he mean? Why was he acting weird? Then he continued, "Shall we hug?" My body gave me even more alerts. Why does he want to get this close to me while he's holding a knife in his hand? Is he trying to do something bad? Why would we just hug out of nowhere? Then my mind told me I've got to get out of this situation quickly without making him suspicious. I wanted to leave this place and go home. I finally replied like nothing happened. "No worries, man. Let's make that fire, eat something so we can go home before we get soaked." But I didn't want to get too close to him. I asked for him to get more branches because the ones we got were wet. I took the rain as my opportunity, and after he came back I told him the fire starters didn't work well in the rain and it might be a better option to head back to the car park. He first looked skeptical and disappointed but agreed. We packed everything and left the place. I didn't want to talk to him on our way back, but I didn't want him to notice something was odd, so I just kept talking like nothing happened. From that moment his tone changed a bit. He seemed colder. I kept him in my sight. After all, we were still alone in the woods. He kept being very negative towards people and life, and made me wonder if he was suicidal in some way. I was happy I did not carry my gun that day, because I was afraid he might try to do something because of it. Once we got back to the parking lot, where I finally saw people, he asked me if I could give him a ride. I chose not to argue, but said I got an urgent call for someone and needed to leave. After all that, I kept asking myself, was he trying to do something? Was he just afraid by the situation? Maybe it was strange for him, even though we knew each other and even partied together. Was he planning something? I mean, we were alone in a place he knew better than me, and he was quite a smart guy. All I can tell you is that I blocked him after that, and decided to message our mutual friend. I knew he was close to Robert, so I explained the situation. My friend told me that Robert was going through depression and was feeling bad lately. I told him that I couldn't do anything legally to help him without his consent, but advised my friend to call him and make him see someone. A few weeks later, my friend had a discussion with Robert, and apparently Robert was open to see someone about his problems. I hope he gets the help he needs, but I'd still rather not meet him again. Me and my assorted group of friends from different branches of the military like to go camping on one of the neighboring farms. All of us have some level of firearm training, carrying guns with us, which is an important fact for the story. We bed down for the night, and it's not 2 hours later we all wake up to screaming and gunshots. We make a perimeter and secure it. We try to figure out what the hell just happened. In a word, wolves. But the kicker was that one of them appeared to have red eyes with a solid black coat. Of course, the wolves get scared of the guns and scatter. But the real kicker, I still went to camp there with the others that didn't swear the place off. I will still see that pack of wolves on and off when I go. I'm from Aotearoa in New Zealand. We do have the odd missing person or scary story case, but it's otherwise safe here, and not much happens. I mean that in a way, as a 19-year-old girl, I feel comfortable to walk the streets at night and go on hikes alone because it's quite safe, and generally, everyone looks out for everyone. This happened in the summer of 2019. My boyfriend and I were heading out on a picnic date to a spot we had visited before plenty of times, Karakariki Track. It's at the end of a very long, windy rural farm road off of the state highway. So you drive for about 15 to 20 minutes from the main road down a long farm stretch, and at the end is a large cul-de-sac and a surrounding massive farm. The owners of the farm have left the land kind of open to the public as a reserve because there are native trees and other things, and because about a 15-minute walk from the cul-de-sac/car park there's a waterfall in which you can swim. The track is really popular as it's one of the closest swimming spots to the nearest city of Hamilton, and it's very scenic. You cross footbridges, pass by creek beds. The farmers still go through every now and then and do their farm work, and there are fenced off areas that the public can't enter as they still actively work the land. Well, on this particular day, my boyfriend and I were super happy because it was empty in the parking lot, and in a super hot summer's day, that's very rare. The farmer was crossing the cows through the gate on a quad as we arrived, and he smiled and waved at us. He was an older gentleman, and we'd spoken before as we were regular visitors. We set off towards the waterfall, crossed one of the footbridges, and passed through a big paddock of cows. The track is quite narrow, and the creek is right off the edge, so you have to be careful. We saw the waterfall, decided against swimming as we had no towels, and headed back to the car park. Now, on our way back, we decided to go down a little bit of a steep gravel off-ramp on the track that led to a more private tree-covered area right by the creek. Here's where it starts. We were kissing and whatnot, and I was laying on my tummy reading a book, and my boyfriend was sitting up playing on his phone, and he was rubbing my back and playing with my hair. We were there for about 10 minutes before I turned and glanced up the gravel path. And way up, even further on a hill, through one of the farmer's gates, I saw a big man on a quad bike who I didn't recognize as one of the farmers, as they're only an old couple who work the land. He was just sitting there staring at my boyfriend and I. I don't even want to think about how long he'd been there before we noticed. I told my boyfriend, and as soon as the guy saw we were both looking at him, he opened the gate and started heading down. Now both of us immediately got up to leave, as we did not want to have a conversation with a farmer about us getting freaky on his land, which is what we assumed would happen, but it was so much worse. The guy came down the gravel track and ran his quad right through the creek. He left it there running in the water and got off. He was talking to himself, saying something along the lines of, "I've messed up my quad. I've messed up my engine," over and over before he even got near us. My boyfriend and I were gathering our things to leave at this point, and he starts to head towards us. He didn't even make small talk, which was really strange, because he was straight into saying, "Have you guys seen any fish? I'm looking here for some fish to kill." My boyfriend tells the guy there are no fish in the creek as it's fresh water and he's probably best to catch some eel, and this sends him into a fit. I don't want to eat no eel, I want to kill some fish. I had to make it a point to not look at the guy in the eyes, as I didn't really want to draw the conversation towards myself because I was already extremely freaked out and I didn't want him to notice that. My boyfriend is much more of the calm and strong one when it comes to stuff like this, but for a second I did look and I thought the guy looked straight up slightly deformed. Possibly Bell's palsy, and I worked in aged care and I've seen a bit and it looked similar. I bent down to tie my shoe up, and when I was standing back up, that's when I saw the pistol on his waist. Listen to me now, this is the first and last time in my entire life I have ever seen a real gun. It is incredibly hard to get a firearm in New Zealand, especially after the regulations following the mass shooting in Christchurch. And not only that, he had one pistol on his belt and was waving another one about in his hand while he spoke to my boyfriend about wanting to kill some fish. He was aiming it down the creek every now and again, and then swinging it around on his finger. My boyfriend gave me this stern look, and stern is the best word for it, because the look spoke a million things to me in the moment, and he nodded his head towards the gravel hill leading back to the track. I grabbed the 2 bags we had, fake checked my phone, and told the man that our family were waiting for us back at the car park. He completely ignored what I had said and instead said, "That's a cool hat you got on," or something about my hat that was completely irrelevant, so I dismissed myself and said goodbye and made my way to the hill. In my mind, I didn't want to look back and see my boyfriend be shot, and then a gun at my head. I knew that our best bet was me getting up onto this hill, onto the narrow path so he couldn't ride the quad bike and sprint to the farmer's house. As I'm walking up the hill, this guy says to my boyfriend, "That's a really pretty girl you got there," and it was like all of his intentions were confirmed. I felt like I would die. My boyfriend though said a quick thank you and that we'd be off, and headed up the hill with me. The guy kept carrying on the conversation like it had never ended, and we headed away, and he just stood there, gun in hand, watching us leave. As soon as we were around the corner, we sprinted all the way back to the car park, where, we hadn't noticed before, there were over 10 empty gun shells. We had run into 2 girls in bikinis just arriving at the spot, and as we did, we informed them about everything. They got in their cars and left immediately. We tried to go to the farmer's house to ask if he knew the guy, as we had never seen him on the land before, but they weren't home anymore. As for the gun, it's still so freaky to me as I'd never seen one before, but these pistols look quite old and rusty, and when we discussed the incident on the way home, my boyfriend suggested they might have been handed down to him from someone else. This incident has stuck with me for the past few years, and my boyfriend and I have been unable to return to the spot, which sucks because that's where we had our first date and it's a very sentimental place for us. I had to drive past that road leading to the track for about a year as I commute between town, and it always made me feel sick. I could have lost my life or my partner that day, or so much worse, and I'm extremely grateful that my boyfriend is the man that he is, and we were able to steer the guy away from us and leave, and to communicate to me through the moment to tell me what to do in my freaked out state. He told me after that he was ready to die if he had to, because knowing the guy had been watching us beforehand and complimented me in that way, it was clear that he could have had some very malicious intentions. It also made me way more fearful now to travel in the brush alone, which I've done my whole life. Kia ora. I was camping east of Sedona with some friends. It was primitive camping, but there were still a few people in the area. I was sleeping in a hammock for the first time, and I set it up across the babbling brook so that I could listen to the water all night. Because I felt so exposed, every little noise would wake me up, and any time a large rock tumbled in the water, it brought me awake and questioning whether it was like a wolf or something. The weird part happened at what I'm guessing was about 3 to 4 a.m. I woke up again and could hear an angelic choir off in the distance, like a choir of people not really singing words but just tones in harmony. Is there a logical answer for it? Sure. I wasn't really scared. It just brought up some images of a cult out in the middle of nowhere doing something weird. I fell back asleep not long after that, and in the morning no one else had heard it. Not really surprising considering the amount they drank. But I do wonder if there was a secret cult gathered there that night, and what kind of shenanigans they were up to. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. A huge thanks as always to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen for their continued support of the channel. It goes a long way in keeping everything run smoothly here at Mortis Media. If you'd like to see more, links can be seen on screen. But until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.